I stood frozen in the marble foyer of the Grandview Country Club, my wineglass trembling in my hand as my husband Marcus's voice carried across the reception hall like a knife through silk. Yeah, well, what do you expect? Sarah's just a secretary. She doesn't understand business like we do. The laughter that followed his words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. Here I was, dressed in my most elegant navy dress, having spent 3 hours perfecting my appearance for his boss's wedding, only to be reduced to just a secretary in front of the most important people in his career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Victoria Sterling's wedding had started with such promise. I remember standing in our bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., carefully applying the concealer under my eyes to hide the exhaustion from another sleepless night spent reviewing quarterly reports for Pinnacle Dynamics, the very company where Marcus worked as a senior analyst, and where I served as executive assistant to the CEO. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Marcus dismissed my role as secretarial, I was privy to more executive decisions and confidential information than he would ever see in his current position. Marcus had already left for his morning run, a ritual he'd maintained religiously since joining Pinnacle 3 years ago. Everything Marcus did was calculated to impress, from his perfectly timed fitness routine to his carefully curated wardrobe of designer suits. Even his marriage to me had been strategic, though I was only beginning to understand that devastating truth. I represented the perfect corporate wife, attractive enough to enhance his image, professionally accomplished enough to hold my own in business conversations, and sufficiently subdued to never overshadow his ambition. As I selected my jewelry for the evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Jennifer. Ready for the society event of the year? Don't let Marcus make you feel invisible tonight. Her warning seemed unnecessary at the time. Despite our recent tensions, I still believed Marcus and I were a team navigating the complex world of corporate politics together. How naive that belief would prove to be. The wedding was being held at the Grandview Country Club, the most exclusive venue in our city, where membership cost more than most people's annual salary. Victoria Sterling, daughter of Pinnacle's founder and newly appointed chief marketing officer, was marrying Jonathan Crawford, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune. It was the kind of event where business deals were discussed over champagne and career trajectories were determined by who you knew and how well you played the social game. I had helped arrange many of the logistical details for this wedding through my role as CEO assistant. Victoria had insisted on perfection, and I had spent weeks coordinating with vendors, managing RSVPs, and ensuring every detail met her exacting standard. The guest list read like a who's who of the business world, with Fortune 500 executives, political figures, and society elite, all gathered to celebrate what the newspapers had dubbed the merger of two empires. Marcus emerged from the shower just as I was fastening my grandmother's pearl necklace, a family heirloom that had been passed down for 3 generations. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile the kind that had first attracted me to him 7 years ago, when we'd met at a corporate networking event. Back then he'd seemed charmed by my intelligence and ambition. Now, those same qualities appeared to threaten him. "You look beautiful," he said, but there was something perfunctory in his tone, as if he were checking off an item on his social obligations list. He adjusted his cufflinks, expensive platinum pieces his mother had given him for our wedding. "Remember, tonight is crucial for my career. Victoria's father will be announcing the new vice president position next month, and I need to make the right impression." I nodded, understanding the subtext. My role tonight was to be the perfect accessory, charming enough to reflect well on him, but careful not to draw too much attention to myself. It was a role I'd been playing for years, though with increasing discomfort. The woman who had graduated summa cum laude with a business degree, and who had been running CEO operations for 2 years, deserved more than to be relegated to arm candy at corporate events. The drive to the country club was tense with anticipation. Marcus practiced conversation topics in the car, rehearsing witty responses to potential questions, and strategizing about which executives to approach. I listened, occasionally offering suggestions based on my insider knowledge of company dynamics, but he dismissed most of my insights with absent-minded nods. This pattern had become increasingly common over the past year as his ambition had grown more consuming. Pinnacle Dynamics was a company in transition. The founder, Harrison Sterling, was gradually stepping back from daily operations, while positioning his daughter Victoria to take over increasing responsibility. The vice president position Marcus coveted was essentially the stepping stone to becoming Victoria's right hand, with a clear path to executive leadership. Multiple candidates were vying for the role, including Marcus's colleague David Chen, a brilliant strategist who had joined the company just 6 months ago, but had already made significant impacts on major accounts. As we pulled into the country club's circular driveway, I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. These events were always challenging to navigate, requiring careful attention to social hierarchies and unspoken rules. But I had become skilled at reading rooms and people, talents that had served me well in my executive assistant role where discretion and social intelligence were essential. The country club's facade was imposing classical architecture with towering columns and manicured gardens that spoke of old money and established power. Valets in crisp uniforms took our car keys while doormen in formal attire welcomed guests with practiced smiles. Everything was designed to impress and intimidate, to remind attendees that they were in the presence of significance. Inside, the transformation was breathtaking. The ballroom had been decorated in elegant whites and golds, with cascading orchids and crystal chandeliers creating an atmosphere of sophisticated romance. Round tables covered in fine linens accommodated 10 guests each, with place cards written in calligraphy and centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A jazz quartet played softly in one corner while servers in formal attire circulated with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Victoria looked radiant in a custom Vera Wang gown that had reportedly cost $60,000, her dark hair swept into an elaborate updo adorned with family diamonds. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations and air kisses from the city's most influential figures. Her new husband Jonathan seemed more reserved, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone born into privilege. Marcus immediately began working the room, his social skills fully activated as he approached various groups of executives and their spouses. I followed dutifully, smiling and making appropriate conversation while he positioned himself strategically in discussions about market trends and company projections. I noticed how he subtly downplayed my role when introducing me, always emphasizing that I worked for the company without mentioning my specific responsibilities or access to executive information. The cocktail hour proceeded smoothly enough. I found myself in pleasant conversations with other spouses and partners, many of whom I'd met at previous corporate events. Several people complimented my dress and asked about my work, showing genuine interest in my perspective on industry development. These interactions reminded me of my own intelligence and capabilities, qualities that seemed to disappear when I was standing beside Marcus and his professional element. Harrison Sterling, Victoria's father and Pinnacle's founder, was holding court near the bar, surrounded by executives eager for his attention. At 72, he remained formidable, his silver hair and tailored tuxedo giving him the appearance of corporate royalty. I had worked closely with him through my role, and he had always treated me with respect and appreciation for my contributions to keeping his office running smoothly. As we moved toward dinner, I noticed David Chen across the room, accompanied by his wife Lisa, a prominent attorney who specialized in corporate law. David had always been respectful and professional in our work interactions, never making me feel diminished or dismissed. His wife was equally impressive, and together they represented the kind of power couple that commanded respect through mutual support rather than one partner's dominance over the other. The dinner seating had been carefully orchestrated, with each table representing different levels of corporate hierarchy and social importance. Marcus and I were seated at table 7, which included several other mid-level executives and their partner. It was a respectable placement that acknowledged Marcus's rising status while keeping him appropriately distant from the head table where Victoria, Jonathan, and the most senior leadership were positioned. During the first course, a delicate butternut squash soup with truffle oil, conversation flowed easily around topics ranging from recent market developments to vacation plans and cultural events. I found myself engaged in a fascinating discussion with Margaret Torres, the wife of Pinnacle's chief financial officer, about sustainable business practices and their potential impact on corporate responsibility initiatives. Marcus seemed pleased with how the evening was progressing. He was animated and charming, telling stories and offering insights that positioned him as thoughtful and strategic. I could see him calculating each interaction, measuring the impression he was making and adjusting his approach accordingly. This level of social performance was exhausting to witness, but I understood its necessity in the corporate world we inhabited. As the main course was served, an elegant filet mignon with seasonal vegetables, Harrison Sterling stood to offer a toast to the newlywed. His speech was warm and personal, celebrating not only his daughter's happiness, but also the joining of two families who shared values of integrity, innovation, and community service. The room listened attentively, everyone aware that they were witnessing a moment of significance beyond just a wedding celebration. Following Harrison's toast, several other speakers offered their congratulations, including Jonathan's father and Victoria's college roommate who had flown in from London for the occasion. The speeches were touching and humorous, creating an atmosphere of genuine celebration that temporarily overshadowed the undercurrent of business networking that permeated every interaction. It was during the transition between dinner and dancing that everything began to unravel. Marcus had excused himself to visit the restroom, leaving me momentarily alone at our table as other guests moved toward the bar or stepped onto the terrace for fresh air. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was checking my phone for messages when I overheard a conversation from the nearby table where several of Marcus's colleagues were gathered. "The vice president announcement is going to be interesting," one of them was saying. Sterling's been watching both Marcus and David closely, evaluating their leadership potential and strategic thinking. "David's got the edge on innovation," another voice replied. "His presentation on digital transformation was brilliant, and he's already implemented systems that have saved the company millions. But Marcus has the corporate polish," a third person added. "He knows how to play the game, how to work the relationships. That matters at the executive level." I listened with growing interest, my insider knowledge allowing me to understand the full context of their discussion. Through my role, I had access to performance reviews, budget allocations, and strategic planning documents that revealed the true scope of both candidates' contributions. David's innovations were indeed impressive, but I also knew about several initiatives Marcus had proposed that had been quietly adopted without his receiving proper credit. Marcus returned to the table just as Victoria approached the microphone for her own speech. She looked stunning in the spotlight, her confidence evident as she thanked the guests for sharing in their special day. Her words were gracious and heartfelt, acknowledging the support of family, friends, and colleagues who had contributed to making the evening magical. "I'm particularly grateful to Sarah Matthews," Victoria said, her gaze finding me across the room, whose attention to detail and dedication made so much of tonight's perfection possible. "Sarah, you've been invaluable in coordinating the countless details that have made this celebration everything we dreamed it would be." The acknowledgement was unexpected and deeply appreciated. I felt a warm flush of pride as applause rippled through the room, and several people at our table turned to smile at me with newfound recognition. For a moment I felt truly seen and valued for my contributions, rather than just my role as Marcus's wife. But Marcus's reaction was immediate and troubling. His smile became fixed and artificial, and I could see the tension in his jaw as he applauded politely while clearly struggling with having his wife publicly recognized for achievements independent of his own. The moment passed quickly as Victoria continued her speech, but the damage to Marcus's ego was evident in the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his wine glass. As the evening transitioned to dancing and more casual mingling, Marcus's demeanor shifted subtly but significantly. He became more aggressive in his networking, more insistent on inserting himself into conversations, and more dismissive of my attempts to contribute to discussion. It was as if Victoria's public acknowledgement had threatened his carefully constructed image of being the successful partner in our marriage. The jazz quartet had been replaced by a full orchestra, and couples began filling the dance floor as romantic melodies filled the air. Marcus led me onto the floor for the obligatory dance, but his movements were mechanical and distracted. His attention was focused on surveying the room, identifying targets for further networking rather than enjoying the moment with his wife. "You're not present," I whispered as we swayed to the music, trying to connect with the man I had married rather than the ambitious executive he had become. "This is important, Sarah," he replied without looking at me, These relationships could determine our entire future. The use of our future stung because it felt performative rather than genuine. Increasingly, I wondered if Marcus viewed our marriage as a business partnership where my primary value was in supporting his ambitions, rather than as a love story where we built something meaningful together. The realization was painful but impossible to ignore. After our dance, Marcus immediately gravitated toward a group of senior executives, who were engaged in what appeared to be a serious business discussion. I followed, assuming I would be included or at least acknowledged, but Marcus positioned himself in a way that effectively excluded me from the circle. I stood awkwardly on the periphery, feeling invisible and increasingly frustrated with my relegated status. The conversation centered around emerging market opportunities and the strategic vision needed to position Pinnacle for future growth. These were topics I understood well through my work, and I had insights that could have contributed meaningfully to their discussion. But Marcus's body language made it clear that my participation was not welcome or desired. David Chen approached the group during this conversation, and I watched with interest as the dynamic shifted. Unlike Marcus, David acknowledged the other spouses present and made an effort to include everyone in the discussion. When he was introduced to me, he immediately recognized my name from our professional interactions, and spoke knowledgeably about projects we had collaborated on. Sarah's been instrumental in streamlining the executive communication processes, David told the group. Her innovations in document management and meeting coordination have significantly improved efficiency at the senior level. His recognition felt genuine and professional, a stark contrast to Marcus's tendency to diminish my contributions. I found myself engaged in substantive conversation about business process improvements and strategic planning, topics where my expertise was both relevant and valued. Marcus's discomfort with this exchange was palpable. He began interrupting my responses and redirecting attention back to his own ideas and accomplishments. The behavior was subtle enough that others might not have noticed, but I recognized the pattern from countless previous interactions, where he had felt threatened by my competence. As the evening progressed, Marcus's need to assert dominance became more pronounced. When I mentioned a cost-saving initiative I had helped implement, he quickly claimed credit for suggesting the approach. When someone asked about my educational background, he interrupted to discuss his own MBA and professional certification. Each interaction became a competition where he needed to establish his superiority. The breaking point came during a conversation with Harrison Sterling and several other senior executives, who had gathered near the bar during a break in the dancing. I had been discussing sustainable business practices with Margaret Torres when Harrison approached and invited me to share my thoughts with the larger group. Sarah has some interesting perspectives on corporate responsibility initiatives, he said, drawing me into the circle. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how these programs could be integrated into our strategic planning. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Marcus had been seeking all evening, but it was being offered to me based on my own merits and insight. I began sharing ideas about sustainability programs that could enhance both corporate image and operational efficiency, drawing on research I had conducted for various executive presentations. The executives listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and building on my suggestions with their own experiences and perspectives. It was an engaging professional discussion where I felt valued and respected for my knowledge and analytical ability. For the first time all evening, I was being seen as an individual contributor rather than just someone's spouse. Marcus watched this interaction with growing agitation, his discomfort evident in his forced smile and fidgeting hand. When Harrison asked for my opinion on implementing pilot programs across different divisions, Marcus finally couldn't contain himself any longer. "Well, what do you expect?" he said with a laugh that sounded casual but carried an edge of condescension. "Sarah's just a secretary. She doesn't understand business like we do." The words hit the air like a physical blow, creating an immediate and uncomfortable silence. Harrison's expression shifted from interested engagement to visible displeasure, while the other executives exchanged glances that ranged from surprised to disapproving. Margaret Torres looked genuinely shocked, and David Chen's face reflected the same professional mortification I was feeling. But it was Victoria Sterling who provided the most damning response. She had approached the group just in time to hear Marcus's dismissive comment, and her reaction was swift and cutting. Actually, Marcus, Sarah understands our business better than most people in this room. She coordinates executive strategy sessions, manages confidential communications, and has access to information that would surprise you. Perhaps you should pay more attention to your wife's capabilities instead of diminishing them. The rebuke was delivered with the authority of someone who held significant power within the company, and it left Marcus visibly flustered. His face reddened as he realized the magnitude of his error, not just in insulting me, but in doing so, in front of his boss's daughter, and potential future leader of the organization. I stood frozen in the aftermath of this exchange, feeling simultaneously vindicated and humiliated. While Victoria's defense was appreciated, the public nature of Marcus's dismissal and the subsequent correction created a scene that would be remembered and discussed long after the wedding ended. The damage to both our reputations and our marriage felt irreversible. Harrison Sterling's expression had grown cold as he processed what had just occurred. As someone who valued loyalty and respect, witnessing an employee publicly diminish his wife at a family celebration represented a character failure that transcended professional consideration. The look he gave Marcus carried implications that extended far beyond social disapproval. "If you'll excuse me," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos of emotions churning inside me. "I need some air." I walked away from the group with as much dignity as I could muster, aware that every step was being watched and analyzed by people who would be discussing this incident for months to come. The marble foyer where I had started the evening with such hope now felt like a refuge where I could finally breathe without the weight of performative expectation. But as I stood there, replaying Marcus's words and the subsequent reactions, something unexpected began to emerge from my humiliation and anger. A clarity that had been building for months suddenly crystallized into sharp focus. This wasn't just about one terrible moment at a wedding. This was about a pattern of disrespect that had been escalating as Marcus's ambitions grew more consuming. The woman who had once felt grateful to be included in Marcus's professional world was gone, replaced by someone who recognized her own worth and refused to accept diminishment from anyone, including her husband. The executive assistant who coordinated million-dollar decisions and managed confidential information wasn't just a secretary, and the wife who had sacrificed her own career advancement to support her husband's ambitions deserved better than public humiliation. As I stood in that elegant foyer, surrounded by the sounds of celebration from the ballroom behind me, I began to understand that this moment wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet fully envision but knew would require every ounce of strength, intelligence, and determination I possessed. The night that had started with such promise was far from over, and neither was my story. The cool October air on the country club's terrace provided little relief from the burning embarrassment that coursed through my veins. I gripped the stone balustrade with both hands, trying to steady myself as the full weight of what had just happened began to settle. Behind me, the warm glow of the ballroom windows cast dancing shadows across the manicured gardens, while the distant sound of laughter and conversation served as a cruel reminder that life was continuing normally for everyone else. My phone vibrated in my clutch purse, and I pulled it out to see a text from Jennifer. "Saw the photos on social media. You look absolutely stunning tonight. Hope Marcus is treating you like the queen you are." The irony of her message made my throat tight. If only she knew that less than 10 minutes ago, her best friend had been publicly reduced to just a secretary by the man who was supposed to cherish and protect her. I was still staring at my phone when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. For a moment I hoped it might be Marcus coming to apologize, to somehow explain away the inexplicable cruelty of his words. Instead, I turned to find David Chen walking toward me, his expression filled with genuine concern. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said softly, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. What happened in there was completely inappropriate." His kindness threatened to crack the composed facade I was desperately trying to maintain. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just needed some fresh air." David moved to lean against the balustrade beside me, but not close enough to make me uncomfortable. We stood in silence for a moment, both looking out over the gardens where tiny lights had been strung through the trees like captured stars. Finally, he spoke again. You know, in all my years in corporate environments, I've learned that the people who diminish others usually do so because they feel diminished themselves. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it might help explain it. I glanced at him sideways, surprised by his insight. David had always struck me as thoughtful and observant, but this level of emotional intelligence was unexpected. You think Marcus feels diminished? I think Marcus feels threatened, David replied carefully. By your competence, your relationships within the company, your natural intelligence. Some people respond to feeling threatened by trying to diminish the source of that threat. His words resonated with something I had been sensing but hadn't been able to articulate. Over the past year, as my role at Pinnacle had expanded and my responsibilities had grown, Marcus had become increasingly critical of my work and dismissive of my contributions. I had attributed it to stress from his own career pressures, but David's perspective suggested something more troubling. The irony is, David continued, that your insights tonight about sustainability initiatives were exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategic planning that Harrison Sterling values. You weren't speaking as someone's wife or as a secretary. You were contributing as a business professional with valuable perspective. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the sound of heels clicking across the terrace stone. Victoria Sterling approached us, having changed from her elaborate wedding gown into a simpler but equally elegant reception dress. Even after hours of celebration, she looked perfectly composed, every inch the executive leader she was destined to become. "Sarah, I've been looking for you," she said, her voice carrying the authority that came naturally to someone born into corporate royalty. "I wanted to apologize for what happened in there. Marcus's behavior was unacceptable, and I hope you know that it doesn't reflect how anyone at Pinnacle actually views your contributions." The fact that Victoria had sought me out personally, on her wedding night no less, spoke volumes about both her character and the severity of Marcus's mistake. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means more than you know." Victoria's expression grew more serious. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. What happened tonight wasn't just a personal slight, though it was certainly that. It was a demonstration of judgment and character that raises serious questions about Marcus's suitability for advancement within our organization." David shifted uncomfortably beside me, clearly recognizing the implications of Victoria's words. As someone who was also being considered for the vice president position, he was witnessing his primary competition make a potentially career-ending mistake. My father built Pinnacle on principles of respect, integrity, and collaboration. Victoria continued, "We promote leaders who embody those values, not just in their professional interactions, but in all aspects of their lives. A man who would publicly humiliate his wife at a company function has shown us exactly who he is." The weight of her statement hung in the air between us. I understood that Victoria wasn't just offering comfort or support. She was essentially telling me that Marcus had damaged his career prospects beyond repair with a single thoughtless comment. The promotion he had been so desperately pursuing, the advancement that had consumed his thoughts and driven his behavior for months, was likely now beyond his reach. "I should go find him," I said finally, though the thought filled me with dread. "We need to talk about what happened." Victoria placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Sarah, before you do that, I want you to consider something. Next week, we're announcing the creation of a new position, Director of Strategic Operations. It's essentially a senior liaison role between executive leadership and various department heads, focusing on process improvement and strategic implementation. The salary would be nearly double what you're making now, with full executive benefits and a clear path for further advancement." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "We've been planning this role for months, but we needed the right person to fill it. Someone with deep institutional knowledge, proven ability to manage complex projects, and the trust of senior leadership. You've been at the top of our candidate list since the beginning." David smiled genuinely beside me. "That's fantastic, Sarah. You'd be perfect for that role." My mind raced to process this unexpected development. A director-level position would not only provide financial independence, but would also place me on the executive track within Pinnacle. It was the kind of opportunity I had dreamed about, but never dared to pursue while prioritizing Marcus's career advance. I would need to think about it, I said cautiously. There are complications with my current situation. Of course, Victoria replied. But Sarah, don't let someone else's limitations define your potential. You've been managing executive-level responsibilities for years. It's time you received the recognition and compensation that reflects your actual value to this organization. As she walked away to rejoin her reception, I stood in stunned silence, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just transpired. In the span of 30 minutes, my marriage had been publicly humiliated, my husband's career prospects had been effectively destroyed, and I had been offered the professional opportunity of a lifetime. The evening that had started with such careful expectations had become a complete inversion of everything I thought I knew about my life. David remained beside me for a few more minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, he spoke again. For what it's worth, Sarah, I think you should seriously consider Victoria's offer. You've earned that opportunity through your own merits, regardless of what happened tonight. What about Marcus? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I was still prioritizing his feelings after what he had done. What about him? David replied gently. Sarah, successful marriages are built on mutual respect and support. What happened tonight wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a revelation of how Marcus truly views you and your worth. That's information you need to take serious. After David excused himself to return to his own wife, I remained alone on the terrace, trying to gather the courage to face whatever came next. The distant sounds of the reception continued, but I felt completely disconnected from the celebration happening inside. Everything familiar about my life suddenly felt uncertain and unstable. When I finally returned to the ballroom, I found Marcus standing with a small group of his colleagues near the bar. His forced joviality was immediately apparent. He was working too hard to appear unaffected by the earlier incident. The men around him seemed uncomfortable, their conversations stilted and artificial. Word of his public humiliation had clearly spread, creating an awkwardness that no amount of casual chatter could dispel. Marcus spotted me approaching and excused himself from the group, walking toward me with an expression that attempted contrition, but missed the mark. His smile was too bright, his movements too deliberate, like an actor who hadn't quite mastered his role. There you are, he said, reaching for my hand. I was worried when you disappeared. Are you feeling all right? The casual dismissal of what had happened, the attempt to frame my departure as a health issue rather than a direct response to his cruelty, confirmed everything David had suggested about Marcus's character. He wasn't approaching me with genuine remorse or understanding. He was trying to manage the situation and minimize its impact on his image. We need to talk, I said quietly, pulling my hand away from his grasp. Of course, but maybe we could wait until we get home. I don't want to miss any important conversations tonight. Harrison Sterling mentioned he might want to chat with some of the junior executives before the evening ends. The fact that Marcus was still focused on networking opportunities after publicly humiliating me revealed the depth of his self-absorption. He genuinely seemed to believe that he could smooth over our personal crisis while continuing to pursue his professional ambitions, as if nothing had changed. Marcus, Harrison Sterling watched you call your wife just a secretary in front of his daughter and the company's senior leadership. I don't think you'll be having any important conversations with him tonight, or any other night. For the first time I saw genuine fear flicker across Marcus's features, the realization that his thoughtless comment might have consequences beyond our marriage seemed to be dawning on him slowly. His carefully constructed professional image, built over years of strategic networking and calculated charm, had been destroyed in a single moment of revealing honesty. Sarah, you're overreacting, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It was just a joke, a little teasing between spouses. Everyone knows I respect your work. Everyone knows you called me just a secretary when I was contributing meaningful insights to a business discussion, I corrected. Everyone watched Victoria Sterling defend me from my own husband's dismissal. Everyone saw Harrison Sterling's reaction to your behavior. The color drained from Marcus's face as the full implications of his actions began to register. In his eagerness to assert his superiority and diminish my contributions, he had forgotten that his audience included the very people who would determine his professional future. The promotion he had been pursuing so aggressively was now almost certainly beyond his reach. "We can fix this," he said, desperately. "I'll apologize to Victoria, explain that I was nervous and said something stupid. People make mistakes at social events all the time. Some mistakes can't be fixed with apologies," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Some actions reveal character in ways that can't be undone with explanations." We were interrupted by the approach of Harrison Sterling himself, looking distinguished and formidable in his formal attire. Both Marcus and I straightened instinctively, recognizing the significance of his personal attention. Harrison's expression was cordial but cool, particularly when his gaze settled on Mark. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you again for all your work in making tonight's celebration so special," Harrison said, his tone warm and genuine. "Victoria tells me she's spoken with you about some exciting new opportunities. I hope you'll give them serious consideration." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I replied, acutely aware of Marcus tensing beside me. "It's been an honor to be part of such a beautiful celebration." Harrison's attention shifted to Marcus, and the temperature of his demeanor dropped noticeably. "Marcus, I trust you're enjoying the evening's festivity." The polite but distant tone was a clear indication that Marcus had fallen significantly in Harrison's estimation. In corporate circles, this kind of subtle disapproval was often more damaging than direct confrontation. It signaled that Marcus was no longer considered leadership material, regardless of his technical qualifications or past performance. "Yes, sir, it's been a wonderful celebration," Marcus replied, his voice tight with anxiety. "I was hoping we might have a chance to discuss some of the strategic initiatives I've been developing for the upcoming quarter." Harrison's smile was polite but dismissive. "I'm sure your direct supervisor would be the appropriate person for those discussions." "Please excuse me, I should return to my other guests." The dismissal was professional but devastating. Harrison Sterling had essentially communicated that Marcus was no longer important enough to warrant his personal attention or consideration for strategic discussion. The vice president position that had seemed within reach just hours earlier had become an impossibility. After Harrison walked away, Marcus stood in stunned silence, finally comprehending the magnitude of his professional miscalculation. The networking strategy that had defined his approach to corporate advancement had backfired spectacularly, leaving him isolated and diminished in the eyes of the very people he had been trying to impress. "I think we should leave," I said quietly, recognizing that our continued presence would only deepen the embarrassment for both of us. Marcus nodded numbly, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. As we made our way toward the exit, I was aware of conversations stopping and resuming as we passed, the subtle but unmistakable signs that we had become the subject of whispered discussions and speculative commentary. The valet brought our car with professional efficiency, but even he seemed to regard Marcus with a slightly different demeanor than he had upon our arrival. Word of the evening's incident had spread beyond the guest to include the service staff, creating a comprehensive social humiliation that would follow Marcus far beyond this single event. The drive home was conducted in heavy silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what had transpired and what it might mean for our future. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his jaw clenched as he processed the destruction of his carefully cultivated professional relationship. I stared out the passenger window, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, while contemplating Victoria's job offer and its implications for my independence. Our house, a modest but comfortable colonial in an upscale suburban neighborhood, had always represented security and achievement to me. Marcus and I had purchased it 3 years ago as a symbol of our combined success and shared future. Now, as we pulled into the driveway, it felt more like a prison where we would be forced to confront the reality of our deteriorating marriage without the buffer of social expectations and professional obligation. Inside, Marcus immediately poured himself a generous glass of whiskey and settled into his leather chair, the one piece of furniture he had insisted on when we'd furnished the house. I kicked off my heels and went to the kitchen to make tea, needing the familiar ritual to calm my racing thoughts and process the evening's revelation. When I returned to the living room with my steaming mug, Marcus was staring into his glass as if it contained answers to questions he wasn't ready to ask. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and long-suppressed resentment. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you mean it?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. Marcus struggled to find words that might explain away his behavior without admitting the underlying attitudes that had prompted it. "I was nervous, trying to fit in with the senior executives. Sometimes men say stupid things when they're trying to prove themselves. You were trying to prove yourself by diminishing me? That wasn't my intention, but it was the result," I said firmly. "Regardless of your intention, you publicly dismissed my intelligence and contributions in front of the most important people in your career. You reduced me to a stereotype to make yourself feel superior." Marcus took a long drink of whiskey before responding. "Sarah, you have to understand the pressure I've been under. The vice president position would change everything for us, for our future. I've been working toward this opportunity for years, and now it's gone," I stated matter-of-factly. "We don't know that for certain." "Yes, we do," I replied with quiet certainty. "Harrison Sterling and Victoria both made it clear that your behavior tonight reflected character deficiencies that disqualify you from leadership consideration. That opportunity is over." The finality of my assessment seemed to break something inside Marcus. His carefully maintained composure crumbled, and for the first time, I saw genuine despair in his features. The ambitious executive who had been so confident about his rising trajectory was confronting the reality that his own actions had sabotaged everything he had worked to achieve. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice hollow. "That depends on what you're willing to acknowledge and change," I replied. "This wasn't an isolated incident, Marcus. It was the culmination of months of increasingly disrespectful behavior toward me, and dismissive attitudes about my work and capability." Marcus looked up from his glass, and I could see him calculating whether to continue with deflection and minimization, or to finally engage with the serious conversation our marriage desperately needed. The choice he made in this moment would determine whether there was any possibility of rebuilding what had been damaged. "I know I've been difficult lately," he said slowly. "The pressure at work, the competition for the promotion. It's made me tense and focused on things that maybe I shouldn't have prioritized." It was a start, but it fell far short of the acknowledgement and accountability that would be necessary for any real progress. Marcus was still framing his behavior as a response to external pressures, rather than taking responsibility for choices he had made about how to treat his wife. "Marcus, this isn't about work pressure or career stress. This is about fundamental respect and how you view our relationship. Tonight, you revealed that you see me as an accessory to your success, rather than as a partner with my own value and capability." The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus alternating between defensive justifications and half-hearted attempts at apology. It became increasingly clear that he was unable or unwilling to take full responsibility for his behavior, or to understand how deeply his actions had damaged both our marriage and his professional reputation. When I finally went upstairs to bed, leaving Marcus alone with his whiskey and his regrets, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. The evening that had started with such careful preparation and hopeful expectations had become a watershed moment that crystallized everything I needed to understand about my marriage and my future. As I removed my jewelry and hung up my navy dress, I thought about Victoria's job offer and what it represented. For years I had defined my success through Marcus's achievements, and measured my worth by how well I supported his ambitions. The director position would allow me to build something that belonged entirely to me, independent of anyone else's approval or advancement. The woman who had stood in this same bedroom that morning, applying concealer to hide her exhaustion and carefully selecting accessories to complement her husband's career objectives, felt like a stranger to me now. In her place was someone who understood her own value and refused to accept diminishment from anyone, including the man who was supposed to love and cherish her above all others. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams, where I was standing before corporate boardrooms presenting strategic initiatives with confidence and authority, where my insights were valued and my contributions recognized, where I was seen and respected for who I truly was, rather than whose wife I happened to be. When I woke Monday morning, Those dreams felt less like fantasies and more like possibilities that were finally within my reach. The transformation that had begun with Marcus's cruel words at Victoria Sterling's wedding was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid for something entirely new. Whether that future included my husband or not remained to be determined, but it would definitely include a version of myself that I was only beginning to discover and appreciate. Monday morning arrived with an oppressive gray sky that matched the heaviness settling in my chest as I prepared for what I knew would be one of the most difficult days of my professional life. The weekend had passed in a blur of tense conversations, sleepless nights, and the growing realization that my marriage and career were standing at a crossroads that would define everything that came after. Marcus had left early for the office, claiming he needed to get ahead of any gossip or speculation about Saturday night's incident. His departure had been awkward and stilted, with neither of us acknowledging the elephant in the room that our relationship might be irreparably damaged. The man who had once kissed me goodbye with genuine affection now barely made eye contact as he gathered his briefcase and headed for the door. I stood in my closet for nearly 20 minutes, selecting and rejecting outfits as I tried to decide how to present myself on this first day back at Pinnacle Dynamics since the wedding humiliation. The professional wardrobe that had always made me feel confident now seemed fraught with implications. Every choice felt like a statement about who I was and what I wanted to project to colleagues who had witnessed my husband's public dismissal of my work. Finally, I settled on a charcoal gray suit with a silk blouse in deep emerald, an ensemble that projected authority without being overly aggressive. As I applied my makeup with extra care, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and was surprised by what I saw. Despite the emotional turmoil of the weekend, there was something different in my eyes, a clarity and determination that hadn't been there before Saturday night. The drive to Pinnacle's downtown headquarters took me through familiar neighborhoods that suddenly felt foreign, as if I was seeing everything through new eyes. The corporate campus that had been my professional home for 2 years appeared more imposing than usual, its glass and steel architecture reflecting the overcast sky in ways that seemed almost ominous. Inside the building, I could feel the subtle shift in how people regarded me. Conversations paused as I passed, followed by what I was certain were whispered discussions about the wedding incident. Some colleagues offered sympathetic smiles, while others seemed uncomfortable making eye contact altogether. The social dynamics that had once been straightforward now felt complicated and charged with unspoken judgments. My first stop was Harrison Sterling's executive suite, where I had been summoning my courage all weekend to have a conversation that could change the trajectory of my entire career. His assistant Patricia greeted me with unusual warmth and immediately ushered me into his office, despite the fact that I didn't have a scheduled appointment. Harrison looked up from his desk with an expression that combined concern with professional assessment. At 72, he had perfected the art of reading people and situations, and I could see him evaluating not just my words but my demeanor and confidence level as I settled into the chair across from his mahogany desk. "Sarah, I'm glad you came to see me," he began, his voice carrying the gravitas that had made him one of the most respected leaders in our industry. "I've been thinking about Saturday night's events and I wanted to discuss them with you directly rather than allowing speculation and gossip to define the narrative." His directness was both appreciated and intimidating. Harrison Sterling was not someone who engaged in small talk or diplomatic evasions when serious matters required attention. If he wanted to discuss the wedding incident, it meant he viewed it as having significant implications for the company. "I appreciate your discretion, Ms. Sterling," I replied, working to keep my voice steady despite the anxiety building in my chest. "I'm aware that what happened reflects poorly on both Marcus and myself, and I don't want it to create any complications for Pinnacle." Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying me with the intensity that had made him such a formidable negotiator throughout his career. "Sarah, I want to be very clear about something. What happened Saturday night reflects poorly on Marcus alone. Your contributions to that business discussion were insightful and strategic, exactly the kind of thinking we value in our leadership team. Your husband's response revealed character deficiencies that have nothing to do with you." The relief I felt at his words was overwhelming, but I tried to maintain my composure as he continued. "However, I do think this situation presents an opportunity for both of us to reassess some assumptions about your role here and your future potential within our organization." Before I could respond, there was a soft knock on the office door, And Victoria Sterling entered with her characteristic blend of confidence and purpose. Even on a Monday morning, she projected the executive presence that made it clear she was destined for leadership regardless of her family connections. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, though her tone suggested this meeting had been planned. "I wanted to join this conversation because it directly relates to the strategic planning we've been developing for the upcoming quarter." Victoria settled into the chair beside me, creating what felt like a united front of Sterling family leadership. The dynamics in the room shifted as I realized this wasn't just a casual conversation about the weekend's events, but a formal discussion about my professional future. "Sarah, we've been observing your work and contributions for quite some time," Victoria began, her tone becoming more businesslike. "The Director of Strategic Operations position I mentioned Saturday night isn't just an opportunity we're offering because of recent events. It's a role we've been designing specifically with your capabilities in mind." Harrison nodded in agreement. "Your institutional knowledge, strategic thinking, and ability to manage complex projects have been evident throughout your tenure here." What Saturday night revealed wasn't new information about your capabilities, but rather confirmation that you're ready for responsibilities that match your actual skill level. The conversation that followed was unlike any professional discussion I had ever experienced. Instead of being talked at or having opportunities presented to me as favors, I was being engaged as an equal partner in strategic planning. Harrison and Victoria outlined their vision for the director role, explaining how it would interface with various department heads, while providing direct access to executive decision-making processes. "The compensation package reflects the senior-level nature of this position," Victoria explained, sliding a folder across the desk toward me. "Base salary of $135,000, full executive benefits including stock options, and performance bonuses tied to company-wide strategic initiatives." I opened the folder with hands that trembled slightly, unable to fully process the magnitude of what was being offered. The salary alone represented nearly a 70% increase from my current position, but more importantly, it represented recognition and respect for my professional capability. "This is incredibly generous," I managed to say, though the words felt inadequate to express my gratitude and amazement. "It's not generosity, it's business," Harrison replied firmly. "We're offering you this position because we believe you're the best candidate to execute our strategic vision." The events of Saturday night simply accelerated a timeline we were already considering. Victoria leaned forward, her expression becoming more personal despite the professional context. "Sarah, I need you to understand something important. This offer exists independent of your marital situation or any consequences Marcus might face from his behavior. We're not trying to compensate you for being publicly humiliated, and we're not punishing your husband by promoting his wife. This is purely about placing the right talent in the right position." The distinction was crucial, and I appreciated Victoria's clarity in making it. Accepting this promotion wouldn't be an act of revenge against Marcus, or a consolation prize for enduring his dismissive treatment. It would be a recognition of my own merits, and a commitment to professional growth that I had earned through my own effort. "I do need to consider how this might affect my marriage," I said carefully, aware that both Harrison and Victoria were astute enough to understand the implications of my new success potentially overshadowing Marcus's stalled career trajectory. "That's a conversation for you and Marcus to have," Harrison replied diplomatically. "But Sarah, I hope you won't allow someone else's insecurities or limitations to define your professional potential." Successful partnerships, whether personal or professional, should elevate both parties rather than requiring one person to diminish themselves for the other's comfort. His words resonated with painful accuracy. For years I had been unconsciously limiting my own ambitions to avoid overshadowing Marcus or creating tension in our marriage. The promotion he had been pursuing so desperately was now beyond his reach, while I was being offered an opportunity that would place me significantly above his current level within the company hierarchy. "I'd like to accept," I heard myself saying, surprising even myself with the decisiveness of my response. "This is exactly the kind of challenge and responsibility I've been hoping for." Victoria smiled with genuine pleasure. "Excellent. We'll announce the appointment Wednesday morning, which gives us time to prepare the transition plan and communication strategy. Your new office will be on the executive floor, and you'll be working directly with our department heads to streamline operational efficiency." As I left Harrison's office with the signed contract in my briefcase, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension that made my hands shake as I waited for the elevator. The professional validation was intoxicating, but I was also acutely aware that I would be returning home to a husband whose own career prospects had been severely damaged by his behavior at the very same event that had accelerated my advancement. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of transition meetings and strategic planning sessions, as Victoria and Harrison began integrating me into executive-level discussions I had previously observed from the periphery. The difference in how colleagues treated me was immediately apparent. There was a new deference in their interactions and an assumption of authority that felt both empowering and slightly overwhelming. Marcus returned home that evening with the defeated demeanor of someone who had spent the day confronting the professional consequences of his weekend mistake. He barely acknowledged my greeting as he poured himself a drink and settled into his chair with the posture of a man carrying the weight of destroyed ambitions. "How was your day?" I asked, though I was certain I already knew the answer. "Difficult," he replied without looking at me. The rumor mill was working overtime, and I could feel people treating me differently. Johnson mentioned that the vice president announcement has been delayed indefinitely, which probably means they're reconsidering all the candidates. Actually, I knew from my executive-level meetings that the announcement had been delayed because Victoria and Harrison were restructuring the entire leadership hierarchy to accommodate my new position and its strategic implications. But sharing that information would only deepen Marcus's sense of professional isolation. "I'm sorry you had a rough day," I said, meaning it despite everything that had transpired between us. Marcus finally looked up at me, and I could see him taking in my appearance with new attention. "You look different somehow, more confident, maybe. Did something happen at work today?" The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I had anticipated. I had planned to ease into the conversation about my promotion, perhaps over dinner or during a more relaxed moment. Instead, Marcus's perceptiveness had forced the issue before I was fully prepared to address it. "Actually, yes," I said, settling onto the couch across from his chair. "I had a meeting with Harrison and Victoria Sterling today. They offered me a significant promotion." Marcus's expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion as he processed this information. "What kind of promotion?" "Director of Strategic Operations. It's a new position they've created that would put me on the executive team with responsibility for company-wide process improvement and strategic implementation." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Marcus's face cycle through surprise, disbelief, and what I was certain was jealousy as he absorbed the implications of my announcement. His wife, the woman he had dismissed as just a secretary 3 days earlier, was being elevated to a position that exceeded his own level within the company. "When did this happen?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "They've been considering the position for months, but the formal offer came today. I've already accepted." Marcus set down his drink with deliberate care, and I could see him struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the full extent of his resentment and wounded pride. The husband who should have been celebrating my success was instead calculating how my advancement would affect his own standing and self-image. "Congratulations," he said finally, but the words sounded forced and hollow. "I suppose the timing is quite convenient, given Saturday night's event." The implications stung, and I felt my own temper rising in response to his subtle accusation. "What exactly are you suggesting, Marcus?" "I'm not suggesting anything," he replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just interesting that you receive a major promotion immediately after I have a setback. Almost like they're sending a message about which spouse they prefer to work with." His paranoia and self-pity were breathtaking in their scope. Even faced with my legitimate professional achievement, Marcus was unable to separate his own career disappointments from my success or to offer genuine support for an opportunity I had earned through my own capability. "This promotion has nothing to do with you or what happened Saturday night," I said firmly. "It's based on my work performance and strategic contributions over the past 2 years. The fact that you can't acknowledge that says more about your insecurities than it does about Pinnacle's motivation." "My insecurities?" Marcus's voice rose with indignation. "Sarah, my career has just been destroyed by one thoughtless comment, and now my wife is being promoted over me by the same people who have effectively blacklisted me from advancement. How exactly am I supposed to feel about that?" "You're supposed to be proud of me," I replied quietly, You're supposed to recognize that your career problems are the result of your own choices and behavior, not some conspiracy against you. And you're supposed to understand that my success doesn't diminish you unless you choose to let it." The conversation devolved from there into accusations and recriminations that revealed the depth of the problems in our marriage. Marcus couldn't separate his identity from his professional status, and he viewed my advancement as a personal attack on his masculinity and worth. I found myself defending not just my promotion but my right to succeed independently of his approval or comfort level. Tuesday brought new challenges as word of my impending promotion began to circulate through unofficial channels within Pinnacle. The reactions were mixed, with some colleagues offering genuine congratulations, while others seemed to view my advancement as somehow connected to Marcus's downfall. The corporate rumor mill was working overtime to create narratives that linked our professional fates in ways that diminished my individual achievements. David Chen stopped by my desk during the afternoon with what appeared to be a casual conversation but felt more like a diplomatic mission. His demeanor was friendly but cautious, as if he was testing the waters for potential complications. "I heard through the grapevine that congratulations are in order," he said, settling into the chair beside my desk. "The director position sounds like an excellent opportunity." "Thank you," I replied, grateful for his straightforward acknowledgement. "I'm excited about the challenges and responsibilities it will involve." David nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine it creates some interesting dynamics at home, given everything that's happened recently." His delicate phrasing allowed me to address the elephant in the room, without diving into inappropriate personal details. "It's certainly been a week of significant changes and revelations. I'm learning a lot about myself and my priority." "For what it's worth," David said carefully, "I think you've handled this entire situation with remarkable grace and professionalism. Not everyone would have been able to separate personal challenges from professional opportunities the way you." His support meant more than he probably realized. David was widely respected within Pinnacle for his integrity and business acumen, and his endorsement of my promotion would carry weight with colleagues who might otherwise question the timing or motivations behind my advance. "I appreciate that, David. It hasn't been easy, but I'm committed to proving that this promotion was based on merit rather than circumstance." "I don't think you'll have any trouble with that," he replied with a genuine smile. "Your reputation for competence and strategic thinking speaks for itself." Wednesday morning arrived with crisp autumn air that seemed to energize the entire Pinnacle campus as employees arrived for what many suspected would be a day of significant announcement. I had dressed with extra care in a navy blue suit that projected authority without being overly aggressive, knowing that my appearance would be scrutinized by colleagues who were curious about how success might change me. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference center, with Harrison Sterling personally delivering the leadership updates that would include my promotion announcement. As I took my seat in the front section reserved for senior staff, I was acutely aware of the attention focused on me from various corners of the room. Harrison commanded the room with his characteristic presence as he outlined strategic initiatives for the upcoming quarter before transitioning to personnel announcement. When he introduced me as the new Director of Strategic Operations, the applause was polite, but I could sense the undercurrent of surprise and speculation that rippled through the audience. "Sarah Matthews brings extensive institutional knowledge and proven strategic capabilities to this new role," Harrison explained to the assembled staff. "Her track record of managing complex projects and facilitating executive-level communication makes her uniquely qualified to enhance our operational efficiency and strategic implementation." From my new position at the front of the room, I could see Marcus sitting in the middle section with other mid-level analysts. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could read the tension in his posture and the effort it was taking him to maintain his composure while watching his wife receive the recognition and advancement he had been pursuing. After the meeting, I was surrounded by colleagues, offering congratulations and asking questions about my new responsibility. The attention was gratifying but also overwhelming, particularly when I noticed Marcus leaving the conference center without approaching me or acknowledging my promotion in any way. The rest of Wednesday was consumed with transition meetings and strategic planning sessions as I began to understand the full scope of my new role. Victoria had arranged for me to meet with each department head individually to discuss process improvements and identify opportunities for enhanced collaboration across divisions. My new office on the executive floor was a significant upgrade from my previous workspace, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and furnishings that reflected the seriousness of my new responsibility. As I arranged my personal items and reviewed the strategic documents that would guide my initial projects, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction and purpose that had been missing from my work for years. But the professional fulfillment was tempered by the growing realization that my marriage was deteriorating rapidly under the pressure of our reversed fortune. Marcus had become increasingly withdrawn and resentful, unable to process his wife's success while his own career prospects remained damaged by his behavior at the wedding. Thursday evening brought the confrontation I had been dreading but knew was inevitable. Marcus arrived home with the aggressive energy of someone who had spent the day nurturing grievances and building arguments. He had clearly been drinking before coming home, though he wasn't intoxicated enough to avoid the serious conversation we needed to have. "So how was your first day as an executive?" he asked with barely concealed sarcasm as I prepared dinner in our kitchen. "It was challenging and exciting," I replied honestly. "There's a lot to learn, but I feel ready for the responsibility." "I'm sure you do," Marcus said, pouring himself another drink, despite having obviously had several already. "It must be nice to have your career handed to you because your husband made a mistake." The accusation hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud, poisoning what could have been a celebration of my achievement. Marcus's inability to acknowledge my individual merits or to separate his own failures from my success revealed the depth of his insecurity and resentment. "My career wasn't handed to me," I said firmly, setting down the knife I had been using to prepare vegetables. "I earned this promotion through 2 years of excellent performance and strategic contributions. The fact that you can't acknowledge that is your problem, not mine." "Strategic contributions," Marcus repeated mockingly. "Sarah, you're a secretary who got lucky because the boss's daughter felt sorry for you after your husband was mean to you. Don't pretend this is some great professional victory." His words cut deeply, not because they contained any truth, but because they revealed how little he had ever understood or valued my actual capability. The man I had married and supported for 7 years was incapable of seeing me as anything more than an extension of his own success or failure. "If that's really what you believe about me and my work, then we have much bigger problems than your damaged career prospects," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that you've never really seen me as an individual with my own talents and ambitions. I've been a supporting character in your professional story, valuable only insofar as I enhanced your image or supported your goal. The moment I succeeded independently, you immediately tried to diminish that success because it threatened your sense of superiority." Marcus stared at me with a mixture of anger and confusion, as if he couldn't understand why I was refusing to accept his version of reality. "Sarah, I'm trying to be realistic about this situation. You got promoted because Pinnacle wanted to send a message about my behavior. Don't let it go to your head." "And there it is," I said, finally understanding something crucial about our relationship dynamic. "You literally cannot conceive of me succeeding based on my own merits. Even faced with evidence of my capabilities and value, you have to create alternative explanations that preserve your sense of intellectual and professional superiority." The argument continued for over an hour, with Marcus alternating between attacking my qualifications and defending his own wounded pride. What became increasingly clear was that he viewed our marriage as a zero-sum competition, where my success necessarily meant his diminishment, rather than as a partnership where we could celebrate each other's achievement. When I finally went to bed that night, leaving Marcus alone with his resentments and his whiskey, I felt a profound sadness about the end of something I had once believed was permanent and meaningful. The marriage that had provided security and companionship for 7 years was revealing itself to be built on foundations that couldn't withstand the pressure of changed circumstances and reversed fortune. Friday brought new revelations about the extent of Marcus's professional isolation within Pinnacle. Victoria mentioned during our morning strategic planning meeting that several colleagues had approached her with concerns about working with Marcus on future projects, citing his unprofessional behavior and questionable judgment. "We're not looking to punish Marcus unnecessarily," Victoria explained carefully. "But we also can't ignore the impact his actions have had on team dynamics and company culture. Leadership requires trust and respect, and those are difficult to rebuild once they've been damaged." The implications were clear. Marcus's career at Pinnacle was effectively stalled, with limited opportunities for advancement or high-profile project assignment. While he wouldn't be terminated without cause, he would be marginalized within the organization in ways that would make his continued employment increasingly uncomfortable and unrewarding. As my first week as Director of Strategic Operations came to a close, I found myself in the surreal position of managing corporate initiatives that would directly impact my husband's work environment, while he grew increasingly hostile toward my success. The professional triumph that should have been a cause for celebration had become another source of conflict in a marriage that was already strained beyond repair. The woman who had stood humiliated in the country club foyer just 1 week earlier was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept diminishment from anyone. The promotion that had seemed like an impossible dream was now reality, opening doors to possibilities I had never dared to imagine. But success, I was learning, came with its own complexities and challenges. The respect and recognition I had craved were accompanied by isolation and conflict at home, forcing me to choose between professional fulfillment and marital harmony. It was becoming increasingly clear that I couldn't have both, and the choice I would ultimately make would define not just my career but the entire trajectory of my life. The crisp November air cut through my wool coat as I stepped out of the Pinnacle building for what had become my daily lunch walk, a necessary escape from the intensity of my new role and the growing tension that followed me everywhere. 3 weeks into my position as Director of Strategic Operations, I had established a routine of solitary walks through the downtown financial district, using the time to process the overwhelming changes in both my professional and personal life. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer asking if I was free for dinner tonight, but I ignored it like I had been ignoring most social invitations lately. Explaining my situation to friends felt impossible when I barely understood it myself. How could I tell people that my professional dreams were coming true while my marriage was disintegrating in ways that left me emotionally exhausted and confused about what I actually wanted? The transformation in how colleagues treated me had been swift and comprehensive. Conversations that once flowed naturally now carried an undercurrent of calculation, as people adjusted to my new authority within the company hierarchy. Some embraced the change enthusiastically, seeking my input on projects and valuing my strategic perspective. Others seemed resentful of my rapid advancement, particularly those who had worked alongside me when I was just an executive assistant. But it was the isolation at home that was taking the heaviest toll. Marcus had retreated into a cold silence punctuated by passive-aggressive comments about my success and bitter observations about how quickly I had forgotten my proper place in our relationship. He had stopped asking about my work entirely, treating my professional achievements as personal attacks rather than shared victories worthy of celebration. My walk took me past the law offices of Coleman, Peterson and Associates, where my attorney Catherine Coleman had been helping me navigate the legal complexities of what was beginning to feel like an inevitable separation. The consultation I had scheduled for this afternoon would force me to confront decisions I had been avoiding, questions about financial arrangements and custody considerations that made the end of my marriage feel terrifyingly real. Returning to the office, I found Victoria waiting in my executive suite with a stack of documents and an expression that suggested serious business. She had been my strongest advocate during the transition, providing guidance and support that went far beyond professional mentorship. Her confidence in my abilities had become an anchor during the emotional turbulence of recent weeks. "Sarah, we need to discuss the Peterson Industries acquisition proposal," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "The due diligence team has identified some significant operational inefficiencies that could impact the merger timeline, and we need strategic recommendations for moving forward." The Peterson deal represented one of Pinnacle's most ambitious expansion efforts, a complex acquisition that would nearly double our market presence while requiring seamless integration of disparate corporate cultures and operational systems. Being asked to lead the strategic analysis represented exactly the kind of high-stakes responsibility I had dreamed of having. What specific inefficiencies are we looking at? I asked, opening the file Victoria. Their financial reporting systems are antiquated. Their supply chain management lacks transparency, and their human resources policies haven't been updated in over a decade. The question is whether these are fixable problems that add value to the acquisition or fundamental flaws that make the deal untenable. As we dove into the analysis, I felt the familiar surge of intellectual engagement that made all the personal chaos worthwhile. This was work that mattered, decisions that would impact hundreds of employees and millions in revenue. My recommendations would carry real weight in determining whether Pinnacle proceeded with one of its most significant strategic initiatives. I think we're looking at 18 months of intensive restructuring if we move forward, I said after reviewing the operational assessment. The technology upgrades alone would require substantial investment, but the long-term market positioning benefits could justify the costs if we execute the integration properly. Victoria nodded approvingly. That aligns with my initial assessment. Can you put together a comprehensive strategic framework by Monday? The board meets Wednesday to make the final decision, and your analysis will be crucial for their evaluation. The assignment was both exhilarating and daunting. In less than 4 weeks, I had gone from managing executive schedules to influencing major corporate acquisitions. The rapid escalation of my responsibilities sometimes felt surreal, like I was living someone else's professionally ambitious life. After Victoria left, I spent the rest of the afternoon buried in financial projections and operational data, losing myself in the complex puzzle of corporate restructuring. The work required complete concentration, providing blessed relief from the emotional turmoil that had been my constant companion since the wedding incident. My assistant knocked on the door at 5:30 to remind me about the attorney consultation, pulling me back from the absorption of strategic planning to face personal decisions I had been dreading. The walk to Catherine Coleman's office took me through the heart of the legal district, where impressive buildings housed the kind of high-powered practices that handled complicated divorces for wealthy clients. Catherine's office reflected her reputation as one of the city's most respected family law attorneys, with walls lined with legal texts and diplomas from prestigious institutions. She was a woman in her early 50s who projected competence and discretion, exactly the kind of advocate I would need if my marriage continued deteriorating toward its seemingly inevitable conclusion. "Sarah, thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing toward a comfortable seating area away from her formal desk. "I've reviewed the information you provided about your financial situation and the recent changes in your employment status. Let's discuss your options and concerns." The conversation that followed was both practical and emotionally charged as Catherine outlined the legal framework that would govern a potential separation. My new salary and executive position would significantly impact spousal support calculations, while the stock options and performance bonuses included in my compensation package would require careful evaluation. "The timing of your promotion could complicate matters," Catherine explained carefully. "Marcus's attorneys might argue that your advancement was connected to his professional setbacks, potentially affecting how marital assets are divided. We'll need to document the legitimate business reasons for your promotion to counter any such claim." The idea that my professional success could become a weapon in divorce proceedings felt like another violation, transforming my achievements into legal liabilities that would require defensive strategy. But Catherine's thoroughness and strategic thinking gave me confidence that my interests would be protected regardless of how contentious the process became. "What about his career prospects?" I asked, recognizing that Marcus's diminished earning potential would also factor into any financial settlement. "That's where things get complicated," Catherine replied. "His behavior at the company function damaged his professional reputation, but proving the extent of that damage and its financial impact will require careful documentation. We'll need to balance protecting your assets with acknowledging the legitimate consequences of his action." As I walked home through the gathering dusk, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed in less than a month. The woman who had dressed so carefully for Victoria's wedding, hoping to support her husband's career ambitions, had become someone who was consulting divorce attorneys and managing corporate acquisition. The change felt both empowering and disorienting, like I was inhabiting a life that belonged to a stronger, more confident version of myself. Marcus was waiting in the living room when I arrived home, his posture and expression signaling that he was prepared for another confrontation. The cycle of arguments and recriminations had become predictable, with him alternating between accusations about my disloyalty and demands that I refuse the opportunities I was being offered. "Late night at the office again?" he asked with obvious sarcasm. "I had a meeting that ran longer than expected," I replied, hanging up my coat and trying to assess his mood. "Let me guess. Another strategic planning session with Victoria Sterling. More opportunities to plot my professional destruction while advancing your own agenda." His paranoia had been escalating steadily, with increasingly elaborate theories about how my success was being orchestrated to humiliate him. The rational conversations we had once been able to have about our problems had been replaced by circular arguments that solved nothing, and left us both more entrenched in our positions. "Marcus, my work doesn't revolve around you or your career. I'm being asked to handle important projects because I have the skills and experience to execute them successfully. Your inability to accept that reflects your own insecurities, not some conspiracy against you." "Insecurities," he repeated, his voice rising with familiar anger. "Sarah, my wife, got promoted to a position above mine by the same people who have effectively blacklisted me from advancement. How is that not designed to humiliate me?" "Maybe because it has nothing to do with you," I said, my patience finally reaching its limit. "Maybe because my qualifications and performance earned me this opportunity, and your behavior earned you the consequences you're facing. Maybe because the world doesn't actually revolve around your ego and professional ambition." The argument that followed was more heated than usual, with Marcus making accusations about my character and loyalty while I defended my right to succeed independently of his approval. What struck me most was how exhausted I felt by the repetitive nature of our conflicts, like we were trapped in a script that never changed despite countless performances. "I think we need to seriously consider a separation," I said finally, the words emerging before I had fully decided to voice them. Marcus stared at me in shock, as if the possibility hadn't occurred to him despite weeks of escalating conflict. "You want a divorce because I'm having trouble adjusting to your sudden success. I want a separation because you can't be happy for me, can't support my achievements, and can't acknowledge that your career problems are the result of your own choices rather than some plot against you. I want a separation because living with your resentment and bitterness is destroying both of us." The conversation continued late into the night, but we both seemed to understand that something fundamental had shifted. The marriage that had once provided security and companionship had become a source of constant stress and conflict that was diminishing both our lives. Friday morning brought news that would make any reconciliation even more challenging. Victoria called me into her office to share information that Harrison Sterling had decided to restructure the marketing department, eliminating Marcus's current position, while creating new roles that required different qualifications and experience. "We're offering voluntary severance packages for affected employees," Victoria explained diplomatically. "The terms are generous, including 6 months of salary and full benefits, plus assistance with job placement services." The subtext was clear. Marcus was being offered a dignified exit from Pinnacle rather than being formally terminated, but his continued employment with the company was no longer tenable. His behavior at the wedding had created a professional reputation problem that couldn't be overcome through performance improvements or time. "When will this be announced?" I asked, already calculating how this development would impact our personal situation. "Monday morning. We wanted to give you advance notice, because of the obvious complications with your own position here. If Marcus chooses to accept the severance package, we want to ensure there's no appearance of impropriety or conflict of interest regarding your continued employment." The irony was staggering. While I was being entrusted with major strategic initiatives and offered advance warning about significant company decisions, my husband was being quietly pushed out of the organization we both worked for. The professional trajectories that had once seemed aligned were now diverging in ways that made our continued marriage feel almost impossible. That evening, I sat in my car outside our house for nearly 30 minutes, gathering the courage to share the news with Marcus. The conversation would inevitably become another referendum on our relationship, with him likely to blame me for his forced departure despite the clear connection to his own behavioral choices. Inside, Marcus was already drinking despite the early hour, a habit that had become more frequent as his professional situation deteriorated. His appearance had changed over the past month, with less attention to grooming and a general air of defeat that made him seem older and more fragile than his 42 years. "We need to talk," I said, settling across from him in our living room. "If this is about separation again, I'm not interested in repeating yesterday's conversation. It's about Pinnacle. Victoria told me today that your position is being eliminated as part of a departmental restructuring. You'll be offered a severance package on Monday." The color drained from Marcus's face as he processed this information. Despite all the signs and warnings, he had apparently convinced himself that his career damage could be repaired through time and improved performance. The reality of forced unemployment hit him like a physical blow. "How long have you known about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Victoria told me this afternoon. They wanted to give me advance notice because of potential complications with my position." "Complications," Marcus repeated, his expression hardening. "Of course, can't have the executive director's husband hanging around after being fired for embarrassing the company." His interpretation of events continued to center on persecution rather than consequences, but I no longer had the energy to argue with his distorted perspective. The man I had married was disappearing beneath layers of resentment and self-pity that seemed to grow thicker with each professional setback. "The severance package is generous," I said, trying to focus on practical consideration. 6 months of salary plus benefits should give you time to find something new." "Something new," Marcus laughed bitterly. "Sarah, do you understand what happens to executives who get fired from prestigious companies?" Word travel. "The story of my wedding behavior is probably already circulating through professional networks. Who's going to hire someone with a reputation for poor judgment and unprofessional conduct?" For the first time since this crisis began, I felt genuine sympathy for Marcus's situation. While his career problems were largely self-inflicted, the professional consequences were severe and would likely follow him for years. The single moment of cruelty at Victoria's wedding had essentially ended his prospects for advancement at any comparable organization. "We'll figure it out," I said, though I wasn't sure what we meant anymore, or whether there would be a we to figure anything out. "Will we?" Marcus asked, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in days. "Because it seems like you've already figured out your future, and it doesn't include supporting a husband whose career you helped destroy." His accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth wrapped in fundamental misunderstanding. My success hadn't caused his downfall, but it had certainly complicated any possibility of our relationship surviving his professional humiliation. The dynamic between us had shifted in ways that made mutual support and respect nearly impossible to maintain. Saturday arrived with the weight of decisions that could no longer be postponed. Marcus had spent Friday evening drinking and making bitter observations about corporate loyalty and marriage vows, while I had retreated to our home office to work on the Peterson Industries analysis that was due Monday morning. The irony of our situation wasn't lost on me. While Marcus faced unemployment and professional exile, I was being entrusted with strategic decisions that would impact Pinnacle's future growth and market position. The wedding incident that had humiliated me had ultimately revealed our true characters and capabilities in ways that neither of us had anticipated. Sunday brought the conversation I had been dreading but knew was inevitable. Marcus approached me with a resignation that replaced his recent anger, as if he had finally accepted that our marriage was beyond repair. "I've been thinking about what you said about separation," he began, his voice unusually calm. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we need some time apart to figure out who we are individually before we can decide if there's any future for us together." His words should have brought relief, but instead I felt a profound sadness about the end of something that had once been meaningful and hope. 7 years of shared experiences and mutual support were dissolving into bitter recriminations and irreparable damage. "I think that would be best for both of us," I agreed quietly. "I'll move out next weekend, after I meet with the severance counselors at Pinnacle. Catherine Parker has a furnished apartment available for month-to-month rental, so I won't be far away if we need to discuss arrangements." The practical planning felt surreal, like we were organizing a business transaction rather than ending a marriage. But perhaps that's what our relationship had become over time. A mutually beneficial partnership that no longer served either party's interests or emotional needs. As I prepared for Monday morning's presentation to the board about the Peterson acquisition, I reflected on how completely my priorities and perspectives had changed. The woman who had once measured her success through her husband's achievements was now making independent decisions that would shape her professional future regardless of anyone else's approval or support. The Peterson analysis had revealed fascinating possibilities for operational improvement and market expansion, challenges that excited me in ways that personal relationships had stopped doing. The work gave me purpose and identity that existed independently of my role as someone's wife, reminding me of capabilities and ambitions I had neglected for too long. Monday's board presentation went better than I had dared to hope, with senior executives asking thoughtful questions and building on my recommendations with their own strategic insights. Harrison Sterling complimented my thorough analysis and clear communication, while Victoria expressed confidence that my framework would guide their decision-making process effectively. Walking back to my office afterward, I felt a professional satisfaction that helped balance the personal sadness of my dissolving marriage. The woman who had stood humiliated at Victoria's wedding was gone, replaced by someone who commanded respect and wielded genuine influence within one of the city's most successful companies. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless, but it had revealed strengths and possibilities I might never have discovered without the catalyst of crisis. Sometimes destruction was necessary before rebuilding could begin, and sometimes the most devastating betrayals opened doors to better futures that we couldn't have imagined while living safely within our limitations. 6 months later, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, watching the spring rain create patterns on the glass, while reflecting on how dramatically my life had transformed since that devastating October evening at Victoria's wedding. The executive suite that had once seemed like an impossible dream now felt like home, filled with strategic documents, industry awards, and photographs from successful project completions that represented my independent achievement. The Peterson Industries acquisition had been approved unanimously by the board, with my operational integration plan serving as the blueprint for what had become Pinnacle's most successful merger in over a decade. The 18-month timeline I had projected had proven accurate, and the financial projections I had developed were exceeding expectations as the combined companies leveraged their enhanced market position to secure major new contracts. My assistant Jennifer knocked softly before entering with my afternoon schedule and a fresh cup of the particular blend of tea I had become known for preferring during strategic planning sessions. She had been promoted from the general administrative pool specifically to support my expanding responsibilities, and her efficiency and discretion had become invaluable as my role continued to evolve. "The quarterly performance reviews are ready for your signature," she said, placing a neat stack of documents on my desk. "And Harrison Sterling would like to see you at 4:30 to discuss the Morrison Group proposal that came in this morning." The Morrison Group represented another potential acquisition opportunity, this one even larger and more complex than Peterson Industries. Being asked to evaluate such significant strategic initiatives had become routine, but I still felt a surge of professional satisfaction, knowing that my analysis would influence decisions involving hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of employees. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chen, who had become not just a valued colleague but a genuine friend during the challenging months of my separation and divorce. His message was characteristically thoughtful. "Congratulations on the Peterson success metrics. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate. I promise to let you pick the restaurant this time." David's friendship had been one of the unexpected gifts of my professional transformation. Unlike Marcus, who had been threatened by my competence and success, David appreciated my strategic thinking and sought out my perspective on complex business challenges. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared intellectual interests, a refreshing change from the emotional manipulation and competition that had characterized my marriage. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago with surprisingly little drama once Marcus accepted that his financial future would be more secure with the generous settlement Catherine Coleman had negotiated. The house had been sold, with the proceeds divided equally, while my stock options and performance bonuses remained entirely mine as assets acquired after our separation. Marcus had found employment with a smaller consulting firm in Denver, providing the geographic distance that allowed both of us to rebuild our lives without constant reminders of our failed relationship. I had purchased a sleek condominium in the city's emerging arts district, a space that reflected my evolving identity as an independent professional woman, rather than someone defined primarily through her merit. The contemporary decor and carefully curated art collection represented choices made entirely according to my own preferences, without consideration for anyone else's comfort or approval. The transformation extended beyond my professional and living situations to encompass fundamental changes in how I approached relationships and personal decisions. The woman who had once accommodated Marcus's insecurities and diminished her own ambitions to preserve his ego had been replaced by someone who refused to apologize for her success or compromise her goals for the sake of others' comfort. Victoria knocked on my office door, interrupting my afternoon planning session with her characteristic blend of authority and warmth. She had become more than a boss during these months, evolving into a mentor whose guidance had been instrumental in helping me navigate the complexities of executive leadership while managing the personal chaos of divorce. "Sarah, do you have a few minutes to discuss something important?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with an expression that suggested serious business. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Victoria leaned forward with the focused intensity that had made her such an effective leader despite her relative youth. "Dad's announcement about succession planning has been accelerated. He's decided to step back from day-to-day operations earlier than originally planned, which means we need to restructure the entire executive hierarchy within the next 6 months." The implications were immediately clear. Harrison Sterling's gradual transition from active leadership had been planned for several years, but external market pressures and his desire to focus on philanthropic interests had compressed the timeline significantly. Victoria would assume the chief executive role, creating opportunities for advancement throughout the senior management structure. "Where do I fit into this restructuring?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "We want you to consider the chief operating officer position," Victoria said directly. "Your track record with strategic planning and operational integration makes you the logical choice to oversee company-wide efficiency initiatives, while I focus on market development and external relationships." The offer was breathtaking in its scope and implication. Chief Operating Officer would place me among the most senior executives in the company with responsibility for managing daily operations across all divisions, while earning a compensation package that would exceed anything I had previously imagined possible. "That's an incredible opportunity," I managed to say, though the words felt inadequate to express my amazement and gratitude. "It's also an incredible responsibility," Victoria replied seriously. "You'd be managing over 3,000 employees across 12 facilities, with budget authority for operational expenditures exceeding $200 million annually. The learning curve would be steep, but we believe you have the analytical skills and leadership potential to excel in the role." As she outlined the position's requirements and expectations, I felt the familiar surge of intellectual excitement that came with challenging assignment. This wasn't just another promotion, it was an opportunity to influence corporate strategy at the highest levels, while building something meaningful through my own vision and capabilities. "When would you need an answer?" I asked, already knowing what my response would be but wanting to appear appropriately thoughtful about such a significant decision. "Take the weekend to consider it," Victoria suggested. "We'll be making the announcement internally next Friday, so I'll need your decision by Wednesday to finalize the transition plan." After Victoria left, I sat alone in my office trying to process the magnitude of what had just been offered. 2 years ago, I had been an executive assistant, whose husband dismissed her contributions as secretarial work. Now I was being considered for one of the most powerful operational roles in a major corporation, with influence over strategic decisions that would impact thousands of lives and millions in revenue. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's cruel attempt to diminish me had ultimately catalyzed a transformation that revealed capabilities neither of us had fully recognized. His public humiliation had forced me to confront my own worth and ambitions, leading to discoveries about my potential that might never have emerged within the comfortable constraints of our marriage. My phone rang with a call from Catherine Coleman, who had become not just my attorney but a trusted advisor whose guidance extended beyond legal matters into strategic career planning. Her practice specialized in representing high-achieving women navigating complex professional and personal transitions, and her insights had been invaluable throughout my divorce and career advance. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she began, "but I wanted to update you on the final asset transfers from your divorce settlement. The stock options have been transferred to your individual account, and the pension rollover has been completed according to the terms we negotiated. The financial independence represented by these assets was both liberating and slightly overwhelming. For the first time in my adult life, I had significant wealth that belonged entirely to me, with no need to consider anyone else's opinions or preferences about how it should be managed or invested. There's one other matter I wanted to discuss, Catherine continued. Marcus's attorney called this morning requesting modification of the spousal support agreement, based on his improved employment situation in Denver. Apparently his consulting work has been quite successful, and he'd like to reduce the monthly payments we negotiate. The request was both predictable and mildly amusing. Marcus's wounded pride had apparently motivated him to rebuild his career more aggressively than anyone had expected, proving that his professional capabilities remained intact despite his personal character flaw. His desire to reduce financial dependence on his ex-wife was understandable, if somewhat ironic given his previous accusations about my motivations for success. What are your thoughts on the modification request? I asked. Honestly, I think we should agree to it, Catherine replied. The reduction would be relatively modest, and maintaining lower ongoing financial connections with your ex-husband serves your interests better than maximizing short-term support payments. Clean breaks are usually preferable when possible. That evening, I met David for dinner at the Riverside restaurant where we had been celebrating various professional milestones throughout our developing friendship. His easy companionship and intellectual curiosity had become an anchor of stability during the emotional turbulence of the past year, providing the kind of supportive relationship I hadn't realized was possible between ambitious professionals. You look like someone who received interesting news today, he observed as we settled into our usual corner table, overlooking the city lights reflecting on the water. Victoria offered me the chief operating officer position, I said, still slightly amazed by the words coming out of my mouth. David's smile was immediate and genuine, reflecting the kind of generous enthusiasm that Marcus had never been able to muster for my achievements. Sarah, that's absolutely fantastic. You'll be perfect for that role. It's terrifying and exciting in equal measure, I admitted. 6 months ago I was worried about whether my marriage could survive my promotion to director level. Now I'm being offered operational control of a major corporation. And you've earned every bit of it, through your own capabilities and hard work, David replied firmly. The strategic frameworks you developed for the Peterson merger alone would have qualified you for senior leadership consideration. This isn't charity or favoritism, it's recognition of demonstrated excellence. His unwavering support and confidence in my abilities represented everything that had been missing from my relationship with Marcus. David celebrated my success without feeling diminished by it, valued my intelligence without being threatened by it, and encouraged my ambitions without requiring me to prioritize his comfort over my own growth. As we discussed the implications and challenges of the COO position, I realized how profoundly my expectations for relationships had changed. The woman who had once accepted dismissive treatment and emotional manipulation as normal aspects of marriage now recognized that mutual respect and genuine support were not just possible but essential for any meaningful partnership. There's something else I want to discuss, David said as we waited for dessert, his tone becoming more serious. I know this might complicate our professional relationship, but I'd like to explore whether there might be potential for something more personal between us. His directness was both appreciated and nerve-wracking. Over the months of friendship, I had certainly considered the possibility of romantic involvement, but my focus had been so consumed by career advancement and divorce proceedings that I hadn't allowed myself to seriously contemplate new relationship possibilities. I care about you tremendously, I replied carefully, but I'm still processing the emotional aftermath of my marriage ending. The idea of romantic involvement with anyone feels simultaneously appealing and terrifying. I understand completely, David said with characteristic patience. I'm not suggesting we rush into anything or make declarations about the future. I'm simply saying that I value what we have together, and I'd like to see if it might develop into something deeper when you feel ready to explore that possibility. His approach reflected the emotional intelligence and consideration that had drawn me to him as a friend. Unlike Marcus, who had often pressured me to accommodate his timeline and preferences, David was willing to respect my pace and emotional needs, while expressing his own interest honestly. The weekend provided time for reflection about both the professional opportunity and the personal possibilities that were emerging in my life. Saturday morning found me in my condominium's study, reviewing the materials Victoria had provided about the COO position, while considering how accepting it would impact every aspect of my future. The responsibility was genuinely daunting. Managing operational functions for a company of Pinnacle's size and complexity would require skills I was still developing, leadership capabilities I would need to strengthen, and decision-making authority I had never wielded before. But the intellectual challenge was also exhilarating, representing the kind of meaningful work I had always dreamed of having the opportunity to pursue. Sunday brought an unexpected visitor when my doorman called to announce that Marcus was in the lobby requesting permission to come up. We hadn't spoken directly since finalizing the divorce 3 months ago, communicating only through our attorneys about administrative details and asset transfers. His desire for a face-to-face conversation suggested something more significant than routine business. I agreed to see him, curious about what might have motivated the trip from Denver and apprehensive about reopening emotional wounds that had finally begun to heal. When he arrived at my door, I was struck by how different he appeared from the bitter, defeated man who had moved out of our house the previous fall. Marcus looked healthier and more confident than he had in months, his posture straighter and his demeanor carrying echoes of the ambitious charm that had originally attracted me to him. Professional success, even in a smaller market, had apparently restored some of his self-respect and perspective. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said as I invited him into my living room. "I know this is unexpected, but I felt like there were things I needed to say in person rather than through lawyers or written communication." "What brings you to town?" I asked, settling into the chair across from the sofa where he had seated himself. "Business meetings with potential clients, but also the opportunity to have this conversation," Marcus replied. "Sarah, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond anything I said during our divorce proceeding. My behavior throughout our marriage, and especially during those final months, was inexcusable." His words carried a sincerity I hadn't heard from him in years, suggesting genuine self-reflection rather than strategic manipulation designed to achieve some specific outcome. The man who had once been incapable of taking responsibility for his actions seemed to have developed insights that divorce and professional consequences had forced him to confront. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied cautiously. "I need you to understand that your success didn't cause our marriage to fail," Marcus continued. "My insecurity and inability to support your achievements revealed character flaws that were already destroying our relationship. You deserved a partner who celebrated your capabilities instead of being threatened by them." The acknowledgement was both healing and painful, validating feelings I had struggled with throughout our divorce, while highlighting how unnecessary our mutual suffering had been. If Marcus had been capable of this level of self-awareness earlier, we might have been able to address our problems before they became irreparable. "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious about his apparent transformation. "Therapy, mostly," Marcus admitted with a rueful smile. "Losing everything I thought I wanted forced me to examine why I had sabotaged the things that actually mattered. Turns out I had spent years defining my worth through external validation, while being incapable of providing that same validation to the person closest to me." Our conversation continued for over an hour, covering the painful history of our relationship's deterioration, while acknowledging the good years that had preceded the final crisis. Marcus expressed genuine pride in my professional achievements and asked thoughtful questions about my future plans, without any hint of the resentment that had characterized our previous interaction. When he finally prepared to leave, Marcus offered one final observation that stayed with me long after he had gone. "I've realized that the woman I fell in love with 7 years ago was always capable of everything you've accomplished. I was just too insecure to recognize it, and too selfish to encourage it. I'm glad you found the strength to discover it yourself. Monday morning brought a clarity about my decision that made the choice feel inevitable rather than difficult. I walked into Victoria's office with the confidence that came from knowing I was making the right decision for both my career and my personal growth. I want to accept the Chief Operating Officer position, I announced without preamble. Victoria's smile reflected genuine pleasure and satisfaction. I was hoping that would be your answer. When can you start transitioning into the new responsibilities? Immediately, I replied, feeling the familiar surge of excitement that came with challenging opportunity. As we began discussing the transition timeline and strategic priorities for my new role, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. The humiliation that had once seemed like the worst night of my life had ultimately become the catalyst for discovering strength, ambition, and capabilities I might never have recognized while living within the comfortable constraints of my previous existence. The woman who had stood frozen in the country club foyer, reduced to just a secretary by her husband's cruelty, was gone forever. In her place was someone who commanded respect through her own achievements, who valued herself independently of anyone else's approval, and who approached the future with confidence rather than fear. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless, but it had revealed possibilities that made every difficult moment worthwhile. Sometimes the greatest gifts emerged from the deepest wounds, and sometimes losing what we thought we needed revealed what we were truly capable of becoming. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the grand ballroom in the same country club where my humiliation had begun, but this time as the keynote speaker for the Women in Leadership Excellence Award. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was returning to the scene of my greatest embarrassment, as one of the most recognized female executives in the city. The audience of accomplished businesswomen listened intently as I shared my story, carefully edited but honest about the journey from that devastating October night to my current role as Chief Operating Officer of Pinnacle Dynamics. When I reached the part about being called just a secretary, I could see recognition and understanding in the faces of women who had faced their own moments of professional dismissal. Sometimes our lowest moments become the foundation for our highest achievements, I concluded, looking out at the sea of ambitious faces. The voice that tried to diminish me ultimately revealed the strength I never knew I possessed. Today I manage a budget of $400 million and oversee operations that employ over 5,000 people. That secretary they dismissed, she's now running the company. The standing ovation was thunderous, but more meaningful were the individual conversations afterward with young professionals seeking mentorship and established executives sharing their own transformation story. This had become my mission beyond corporate success, helping other women recognize their worth and refuse to accept diminishment from anyone. David appeared at my side as the evening wound down, his presence as natural and supportive as it had become over the past year of our relationship. What had started as friendship had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than I had thought possible after the wreckage of my marriage. Powerful speech, he said, his pride evident in his smile. Though I still think you were too generous in your description of Marcus's behavior. Growth requires grace, I replied, adjusting the diamond bracelet he had given me for our 6-month anniversary. Besides, his apology helped me close that chapter completely. As we walked through the country club's marble foyer where I had once stood devastated and humiliated, I felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The woman who had been destroyed in this space had been reborn stronger, wiser, and infinitely more confident in her own work. The promotion Marcus had fought so desperately to obtain had gone to David 6 months ago, when Victoria created the position of Vice President of Strategic Development specifically for his innovative approach to market expansion. Unlike my ex-husband, David's success complemented rather than competed with mine, creating a partnership built on mutual respect and shared ambition. Ready to go home? David asked, offering his arm as we headed toward the valet station. Home was the penthouse I had purchased, overlooking the city skyline, a space that represented everything I had built independently through my own choices and achievements. But more than the luxury and success, home had become wherever I felt valued and appreciated for exactly who I was. Absolutely, I replied, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities that I would face with the confidence of someone who had discovered her true worth in the aftermath of betrayal. The country club disappeared behind us as we drove into the night, leaving behind the memory of humiliation and carrying forward the reality of triumph that no one could ever take away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.